Think about the last time you genuinely thought to yourself, that was exactly what I needed. Was it surrounded by people? Or was it something quieter than that? Maybe it was a Sunday morning. No plans, no notifications. Just you, a cup of coffee, and the slow, unhurried sound of your own thoughts. If that image felt more like relief than the alternative, this video was made for you. Here's a moment I want you to sit with. It's Friday afternoon. Someone texts the group chat. Anyone free this weekend? And before you've even made a conscious decision, something shifts in your chest. Not excitement, something closer to wait. You type back, maybe I'll let you know. And immediately, you feel slightly better. Or this one, you spent the whole evening at a party. Good people, good music, nothing went wrong. But on the drive home, you're exhausted in a way that sleep alone won't fix. You walk through your front door, close it behind you, and for the first time all night, you exhale. Or maybe the most honest version, your weekend plans fall through. Someone cancels. And your very first reaction before you can stop yourself is relief. And then almost immediately after that relief, guilt. Why am I like this? What's wrong with me? If you felt that exact sequence, relief, then guilt, you are exactly who I'm talking about today. Because here's what we're quietly taught about people like you, that you're antisocial, difficult, cold, that you don't know how to really connect, that everyone else seems to run on people, and somehow you don't, and maybe you've believed it. Maybe you've spent years making yourself more available, more sociable, more on, while somewhere underneath all of that, you kept craving the one thing nobody said you were allowed to want, time alone. But here's where the psychology gets interesting. Researchers who study solitude, not as a symptom, but as a subject, have found something that quietly rewrites the story you may have been telling yourself. People who need solitude to function, who genuinely cannot operate at their best without regular time alone, are not broken. They're not failing at being human. If anything, the research points in the opposite direction. Today, we're going to look at 5 things quietly happening inside the brains of people who need alone time. We'll draw on psychology, neuroscience, and a bit of philosophy, not just to explain what is happening inside you, but to understand why it matters. Why this trait, which you may have spent years apologizing for, might actually be one of the most significant things about you. And at the end, I'll give you something you can use, a concrete way to bring this understanding into your actual daily life. Let's begin. Before we go any further, one question. When you try to explain that feeling, the pull toward your own space, your own quiet, what words do you actually use? Tired, burned out, just not in the mood for people. Those words exist. They're real. But underneath them, there's something more specific happening. And when you find the right name for it, something shifts in how you see yourself. In psychology, there are 2 experiences that tend to get collapsed into one. The first is loneliness. Loneliness is wanting connection and not having it. It's a Saturday night alone in your apartment, and you don't want to be. That hollow, quietly aching feeling in the middle of your chest. It's your brain sending an alarm. Something is missing. Something needs to change. The second is solitude. And this is an entirely different thing. Solitude is choosing to be alone and finding something in that space that you simply cannot access anywhere else. The difference between the two? Loneliness is starving. Solitude is fasting. Both involve the absence of something. But the internal experience, what's actually happening inside you, couldn't be more different. One is deprivation. The other is a choice. So here's something worth sitting with. When you feel that pull towards solitude, when you want to be alone, which one does it actually feel like? Does it feel like pain? Like something is missing and you're trying to hide from it? Or does it feel like relief? Like your nervous system is finally getting permission to slow down? If it's the second, if being alone feels like surfacing after holding your breath, then what you're experiencing is solitude. And that distinction matters far more than it might seem. Donald Winnicott, the British pediatrician and psychoanalyst who spent decades studying what it actually means to be psychologically healthy, arrived at one of his most quietly radical conclusions. The capacity to be alone is one of the most important signs of emotional maturity, not the ability to command a room. Not the ability to be liked. The ability to be alone, comfortably, without anxiety, and to use that space to return to yourself. What Winnicott was pointing at is this. People who need solitude aren't retreating from life. They're restoring the self that life keeps making demands of. Think about what actually happens when you're with other people, even people you genuinely enjoy. Your brain doesn't get to rest. It's reading expressions, anticipating responses, choosing words, adjusting tone, all of it, constantly, without pause. Solitude is when that process finally stops. So the next time you feel guilty for wanting to be alone, try shifting the language. Not, I'm being antisocial, but I'm recharging. Not, I'm running away, but I'm returning to myself. One small change in wording, but that single shift can be the difference between allowing yourself the rest you need and spending the whole time feeling like you shouldn't want it. And when you finally get that alone time, what is actually happening inside your brain? That's where things get genuinely fascinating. Most people think nothing is happening in the quiet, but something is. When you're finally alone, no notifications, no conversation, no one needing anything from you, it can feel from the outside like your brain has gone quiet. It hasn't. Something remarkable is just beginning. Deep inside your brain, there's a network of regions that neuroscientists call the default mode network. The DMN, for years, researchers assumed it was essentially the brain's idle state, the system that switched on when nothing important was happening. They were wrong. The default mode network is one of the most metabolically active systems in the entire brain. It doesn't turn on when you're busy. It turns on the moment you stop being busy. When you're in a meeting, scrolling through your phone, holding a conversation, your brain is locked in what you might call input mode, processing, responding, reacting. And while it's doing all of that, it cannot simultaneously do what the DMN does. Integration. When the DMN activates during a walk, a long shower, a quiet moment by the window, your brain begins doing something it couldn't do while the noise was on. It starts connecting things. Memories find their way to emotions. Patterns surface across experiences you thought were unrelated. Problems you stopped consciously trying to solve quietly resolve themselves in the background. That thing you couldn't figure out for weeks, that conversation you kept replaying, the DMN is working on both of them. It just needs the space to do it. Think about where your best ideas have actually come from. Not the ones you pushed out in a brainstorm. The real ones. The ones that genuinely shifted something. Almost certainly not at your desk. In the shower. On a long drive. Somewhere between awake and asleep. Mid-walk, staring at nothing in particular. That isn't random. That's your brain doing exactly what it was built to do the moment you stop filling the silence. Maybe try this once. Once a day, even 15 minutes, put the phone down. Turn off the music. Sit or walk with no input at all. It will feel uncomfortable at first, but stay with it. That discomfort isn't emptiness. It's the sound of your brain shifting gears from input mode into integration mode. Give it the space. It already knows what to do, which raises a question worth exploring next. People who need regular solitude tend to have something else in common. They trust their own instincts. They're less swayed by trends, less moved by social pressure, less likely to outsource their sense of self to the room they're in. Why? Because they rely on something psychologists call an internal frame of reference. There's a question worth sitting with before we go further. When you make a real decision, not what to eat, but the kind that actually shapes your life, what is it genuinely based on? What you want? What aligns with something deep inside you? What feels honest when no one else is in the room? Or what will avoid conflict? What will make you seem like the right kind of person? What will keep the peace? Most people, if they're completely honest, spend a significant portion of their lives answering that second set of questions and calling it a decision. Psychologists have a name for this. They call it the difference between an internal locus of evaluation and an external one. People with an external locus of evaluation measure themselves against the outside world constantly. Approval, status, what's trending, what their peer group is doing, what the comments say. And in an era of social media, this has become structurally harder to escape than ever before. The problem isn't caring about others. Caring about others is part of being human. The problem is building your entire sense of self on top of opinions that never stop shifting. Because when the outside world changes its mind, and it always does, you change with it, whether you meant to or not. That is an exhausting way to live. And for many people, it's the only way they've ever known. Carl Rogers, one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century, Describe the healthiest human state with a single word. Congruence. The alignment between who you actually are, what you actually feel, and how you actually live. Not the version of yourself you perform for a room. Not the self you constructed to be accepted. The one that exists when no audience is present. People who need alone time are building that alignment, often without realizing that's what they're doing. Every hour spent in their own company, without the hum of other people's expectations in the background, is an hour spent answering questions that the noise usually drowns out. What do I actually think about this? What do I actually want? Who am I when I'm not adjusting myself for anyone? These aren't small questions. They're the foundation of a self that doesn't collapse the moment someone disagrees with it. You've probably felt this, even if you didn't have words for it. You go along with something, a plan, a conversation, a direction your life is moving in. And afterward, something feels slightly off. Not catastrophically wrong. Just not quite you. That feeling isn't anxiety. It isn't guilt either. It's your internal compass doing exactly what it's supposed to do. It's the part of you that knows the difference between a choice you actually made and a choice that was made for you by the pressure in the room. People who spend regular time alone become better at hearing that signal. And more importantly, they become better at trusting it. Here's something small you might try. After you make a decision, especially a social one, pause and ask yourself just one question. Did I do that because I wanted to? Or because I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't? You don't have to change anything immediately. Just notice. Because noticing, done consistently over time, is how a compass gets calibrated. And a well-calibrated compass changes everything, including, perhaps surprisingly, how you connect with other people. Because here's where a persistent myth needs to be addressed directly. People who need alone time are often described as cold, distant, hard to reach, not good at relationships. The research tells a genuinely different story. There's a question here that might be slightly uncomfortable. Think about everyone in your phone, everyone you'd call a friend, a contact, someone you know. Now ask yourself how many of them you could call at 2 in the morning if something had genuinely gone wrong. Not to vent about a bad day, not to catch up, but because something had actually happened and you needed someone who would pick up. Take a moment, count them. For most people, that number sits somewhere between 1 and 5. And before you read that as a failure, consider that it might be exactly right. The British anthropologist Robin Dunbar spent years researching how the human brain actually handles relationships. What he found wasn't what most people expect. The brain has a cognitive ceiling, a limit on how many genuine, stable connections it can hold at once. His research points to roughly 5 people in our innermost circle of real closeness, a slightly wider ring of around 15 we describe as genuinely good friends. Beyond that, relationships begin to thin. They're maintained by proximity, habit, or a sense of social obligation, not by actual depth, which means something worth sitting with. Having hundreds of connections isn't evidence of relational richness. It's often evidence of relational thinning, a finite resource stretched across too wide a surface until each connection holds almost no weight at all. People who need alone time tend to resist this intuitively. They don't maintain friendships as a performance. They don't keep connections alive out of obligation. And as a result, the relationships they do invest in tend to have something that's become genuinely rare. They're real. People who spend significant time alone develop something that most busy, constantly connected people rarely get the chance to build. A sophisticated understanding of their own inner world, their emotions, their needs, their contradictions. And that self-knowledge creates the capacity for depth. When you know what it actually feels like to stay with a difficult emotion, not distract yourself from it, not fix it, but genuinely sit inside it, you become someone who can do the same for others. You're not threatened by silence. You don't need to redirect heavy conversations. You don't feel compelled to fix what someone is feeling before you've actually heard it. You can just be present, fully, quietly, without an agenda. That is a rarer quality than it sounds. Here's one way to think about the quality of your relationships. Ask yourself this about each person in your life. Can I be tired around this person? Not impressive. Not switched on. Not performing. Just tired. Quiet. Uncertain. Unpolished. The people around whom you can be genuinely tired are your real relationships. And underneath everything we've talked about so far, there's an even deeper reason why some people need alone time. Every single day, you are multiple different people. at work, with family, with acquaintances. None of this is fake. It's the quiet labor of being a person in the world. But here's the question underneath all of it. When does the adjusting stop? When do you get to simply exist without managing, without performing, without responding? For most people, the honest answer is not often enough. Carl Rogers called this a loss of congruence, the distance between your inner experience and the self you present to the world. Solitude is where that drift gets corrected. When you're truly alone, the performed versions of you go quiet. And what remains is something simpler and much more important. Just you. People who need alone time are not retreating from their lives. They are maintaining the self that makes a real life possible. If you find your deepest calm in your own company, that isn't a symptom of something missing in you. It's a sign of something working. We live in a world that decided connection should be constant. That silence should be filled. That attention should be harvested. In that context, the ability to seek out solitude isn't just a personality preference. It's an act of resistance. The philosopher Paul Tillich wrote that the courage to be alone is a prerequisite for the courage to be with others. People who need alone time are doing exactly that work. That is not a weakness. It is something to understand, and perhaps quietly to respect in yourself. So let's bring this into focus. If you are someone who genuinely needs time alone, your nervous system is restoring itself. Your brain is integrating experience. You are building an internal compass. Your relationships are gaining depth, and you have a place inside yourself where the performing stops. None of that is a flaw. All of it is a strength. If you spent years believing your need for solitude was a problem, hear this clearly. You were not broken. You were taking care of yourself. That has always been enough. If something in this video resonated, the like button helps this message reach people who need it. Which part felt most like your experience? The difference between loneliness and solitude? The default mode network? The internal compass? Depth in relationships? Or the place inside yourself where the performing finally stops? If this channel feels like somewhere your mind can rest, stay close. There's more coming. Until next time, take your time. You're allowed to.